My name's Robin Sapir. I'm from Woodstock First Nation. I'm the owner of Mazwan Designs, and I make ribbon skirts.
The name of your business is Mazwan Designs. What does Mazwan mean?
So Mazwan is the name born from the Maliseet language, carrying the spirit of creation and resilience. Like morning dew on the grass, it honors quiet strength, beauty, and connection between land, spirit, and identity. Through Mazwan Designs, each ribbon skirt becomes a ceremony of story, healing, and Indigenous power.
And I wonder if you could tell us what Robin was like before the incubator and before last year's forum, and what Robin is like now. What's your before and after story?
I want to first say that I'm a disabled veteran. I served in the United States Marine Corps, and so I was told that I'm 100% disabled and I can't work. So when that set it in, I became really depressed, and I kind of like shut down and kind of went inward. I became like a major introvert and just didn't really go out of my house and didn't really do anything. So when the incubator program came up, I thought, you know, why not? What do I have to lose? And so I just jumped in full force, and I said, okay, let's do this. And so I'd like to think of it like a trip when I'm thinking about myself before and after. I'd like to think of the road ahead of me in the middle of pouring rain, and it's very foggy. So my mindset was very much fog. I didn't know where I was going, didn't know what I was even here for, or what my purpose was. And you know, it was just downpouring all the time. And it didn't matter turning on the windshield wipers, you know, the lights, you just couldn't see where you're going. So I'd like to think of Frank and Diane and the incubator course as like my roadmap. Like, it kind of opened my eyes to the new different roads I could take. So with my community and with this program, it's really opened my eyes to what's possible. I'm gonna be opening a store. Our community is gonna be getting a store for our community members, and I've been told that I'm gonna have one. So I'm really happy to be opening a fabric store. I'm gonna be opening a store where you can come in and you can actually build a skirt yourself, pick out all your materials, and I'll sit down with you and you can do that right on the spot. It's like Build-A-Bear, except for you're doing a skirt. Yeah, so you can do it. There's endless possibilities. I think that there's so much growth, and I never thought like that before. Don't cry.
But it's so hard.
I'm supposed to cry, not you.
And what I liked about this was the combination of business that you talked about and your philosophy for business and your philosophy for how you are dealing with the things that you've had to deal with, and that you're just moving forward, and you're going forward at a pace that is just wonderful to see. So we're thrilled for you.
Oh, thank you, Frank. Thank you.
And we're going to talk a bit about, you know, what are those opportunities in the energy sector. So first question, I'll pass it over to you, Brad. So what are the opportunities for Indigenous businesses and communities to participate in the energy sector in New Brunswick and beyond?
Endless is where I would go, right? So when I had the opportunity to launch what we call a request for expressions of interest for new renewable energy, we really looked at things differently, like Patrick was saying, and saying, hey, a big demographic of our province can get stuff done, but have been overlooked for way too long in their ability to participate. So, you know, we were really deliberate around it and made a strategy to say, you know, we need to do an energy transition, and we're hearing it loud and clear from New Brunswickers that affordability is a big challenge right now. So how do we pull something off and make it a cost savings measure? You're not going to see your bills go down, but the rate of change or the upward trajectory is bending because of the work we're doing at First Nations communities right now. And then that's wonderful. Well, why was that important? Well, one, we just talked about what Patrick was saying. We've got a segment of our population that can get stuff done. And my litmus test on this is we did a program for government a number of years ago called LORES. Locally owned, renewable energy, whatever. It was LORES. I can't remember what the acronym stood for. We had 4 projects come through that 2 Aboriginal business projects, 2 community businesses, and the 2 Aboriginal business projects happened and the 2 community-based ones did not. So I said, wow, look at that. Then we had Birchill. That's not a dirty word at MB Power. We're really proud of St. John Energy and what they accomplished there, but Birchill, another First Nation partner project, happened in this province. And we said there's something to this. So we worked with our federal partners to say, hey, we're interested in affordability, and you've got a lot of funding out there right now. Can we work with First Nations communities so that funding can show up to make projects more economical for New Brunswickers, to help us with our fiscal challenges that we're facing? And sure enough, we put those things together, and we're really happy with the outcome. Laurie Clark, my boss, president and CEO of MB Power, announced close to $1 billion worth of CIB and NRCan funding in December. Just absolutely wonderful, game-changing announcement. So where we are right now in our process is saying, how do we build the next REOI? So we have a federal election happening right now, and it'll be interesting to see what the results of that are and what those governments' priorities are on the other side. But yeah, we're going to keep going. As long as we can make these projects happen economically for New Brunswickers, there's no barrier to our progress on that.
I'm kind of pivoting a little bit with the question because it just made me think of it. I know from what I've heard with a lot of the entrepreneurs that we work with at JEDI, it's how do we access those opportunities? How do we find out about them? Is there like a newsletter? Should you be sending stuff to JEDI so we could share it with our client list? I guess, do you have any insight on how to find out about these opportunities?
That's half the battle, right? It's making those relationships and forming, that, so that there's a network that we can have. Out in the hallway, I met a gentleman, didn't even know the organization existed, and now we've already got, arrangements to have a meeting.
There you go.
And it's more of that's got to happen, that we just kind of say, hey, I'm here, put up our hands. You won't see anybody that's in my office at MB Power say, no, we're too busy to talk to you. So how do we form those networks, and how do we get better? We appreciate the feedback, we take it seriously. So if there are ideas to say, hey, if you just did it this way, we would have better response rate, I'd happily take that feedback any time, any day. We definitely don't have it all figured out. We spent 4 years now of doing business a certain way, and we're trying to figure out how to do the next 100 years in a different way. That's really what we're focused on.
But the information that gets shared about industry news, industry announcements is just incredible sometimes. And like I say, I have more hope for the opportunities that are being placed in front of us than the challenges that we face.
Do you want to maybe talk about those opportunities? Because that was actually my original.
Chime in on that question a little bit.
Go for it before we pass.
So both Brad and Patrick mentioned network. I would say events like this are very important. My career has mostly been in creating new ventures. So every role I've ever had in my professional life didn't exist before I got there. And so I've had a lot of experience in building teams and new business lines and companies. And in that world, you've got to add people as you scale up your capacity and as you take on more projects. And there's a saying that every how problem is actually a who problem. How do you get something done? Well, who can help me with that? Who would be in the position to know? Brad is an incredible source of information and knows everything that's going on in the MB Power world. Jim is one of those people, and I'm working on becoming one. But it's, the organizations that exist, JEDI, people earlier talked about how JEDI had been instrumental to building their small business, and moderator said, how? I said, well, exposure and connections and network and getting my name out there. So if you're interested in this space, it's not so much a how problem as a who problem. Be active, be present in person, reach out to us, come talk to us after the panel. Notice the people who get called out, like when Brad mentions at Genova, for instance, or they have people in the organization that are there to help with the connection with Indigenous communities. So be an active participant and come to these events for the networking, I think is a really great way to get more involved.
So Tristan, since it was just on you, if you don't mind maybe speaking about a little bit more on those opportunities that you're seeing in that space that that Brad didn't already kind of mention.
First of all, the grid, there's an ambition to decarbonize. As I'm sure many of you are well aware, we're working on taking carbon-emitting sources off the grid, and at the same time we have to maintain affordability, reliability, and resilience. And that requires investment in clean energy technologies, grid modernization, storage technologies. So the $1 billion worth of projects that Lori Clark announced that Brad mentioned is all Indigenous-led wind developments. There's, I think, 670 megawatts worth of wind projects were announced. Not all of those are going to get all the way across the line, but that's more than 3 times what the request for expression of interest originally asked for. So Indigenous communities stepped up and partnered with private developers, rose to that opportunity, and there's some really strong financial returns. And there's the opportunity to match the private investment side and the community investment side with very attractive financing support from the federal government. And that helps bring money from outside the province into the province, creates the jobs and creates the clean energy assets that help stabilize power prices and help the province be more competitive. So wind energy projects. Our organization is partnered with a developer. We have 780 megawatts worth of solar projects that have been spec'd out and planned, ready to develop when we harass Brad enough and he gives us a power purchase agreement, which is no doubt coming soon. So we have, that's $1.1 billion worth of total installed cost if all of those projects get developed. And that money, some of it, of course, goes to providers of, say, solar panels that are outside the province. But a lot of it goes to the construction and just to the civil work. So there's supply chain jobs for companies that want to do groundworks and engineering and the construction of these projects. There's opportunities to invest in them. The grid, while we're decarbonizing, it also needs firm, dispatchable power. The intermittent solar and wind can't affordably keep a grid reliable with today's technologies. So we need some dispatchable backup. And the lowest carbon solution to that we have available today is natural gas. So we're also looking at investing in a natural gas peaker plant that will provide MB Power with peak power support. There's nuclear opportunities. We have equity stakes in 2 small modular reactor companies, and we're looking to be investors in any new builds of nuclear power generation in New Brunswick, transmission lines, energy storage projects. So a lot of different technologies. And they're all, we would love to have a completely waste-free, impact-free grid immediately. That would be great. There's no technically feasible way to do that. So if you take that, any energy system is going to have trade-offs. We need to be realistic about what they are, and there are major negative impacts to the power going out. So that's important to understand as we look at the range of options. And Indigenous leadership in understanding those technical solutions and the trade-offs involved and becoming comfortable with the impact. That's been mentioned a moment ago, but it's very important for those projects getting completed, for not running into a lot of social opposition later. So Indigenous leadership in this space is very important.
Don't forget Indigenous knowledge too. Like, we rely on the elders and a lot of Indigenous communities to help us with our projects. So we understand what was the traditional use for those lands, how do we account for that, and of course the archaeological studies that have to go with that as well. It's all part and parcel. Like Tristan was saying, there's nothing that we can do that doesn't have some sort of a negative environmental impact, but it's really important for us to work with our Indigenous partners to fully understand, hey, are we making a huge mistake here? What's your advice? What's your elders' advice? We want to learn from that to make sure that we're picking the right sites and doing the right projects in the least environmentally impactful way possible.
So stewardship is actually one of the questions I've had there, and the importance around it, especially working with Indigenous peoples, especially communities as well. What's that impact to the environment? Is there, I guess, like a need? Obviously, there's a need, but is there work in place? I guess just to follow up, to have something more like a protocol that they need to do part of their consultation before any of these large projects, to have an elder come in, make sure that there's no, we don't have ancestors that you're building on top of, for example. And
right. No, what I'd say, it's a continual cycle of learning that has to happen there. Chantal St. Pierre, many of you might know her from some of her work in leading the environmental files for MB Power. We do monthly meetings with MTI and WNMB and Passamaquoddy Nation, and as well, to kind of let them understand what's coming down the pipe, right? So that there's no surprises at the end of the day. and just constantly doing our best, which we can always do better. I'm not here to say we're doing a great job of it, of just staying relevant in communities so that there's no surprises. And we want to listen and we want to learn. We don't want to do anything to any community, right? How do we do it together, and how do we make sure that we don't make, you know, fundamental mistakes? Because I know it wasn't done perfectly in the past, but we have an opportunity to change how we do it going forward.
You mentioned WNNB, Brad, and I think WNNB is the organization that represents all of the 6 First Nations in the Wolastoqey territory. One of the functions of the WNNB is to manage the resource development consultation coordinators. So each community, and this is for everybody out there who's, you know, planning on doing natural resource development out on the land, that the consultation process is a very important part of all of this. So, you know, Laura mentioned being stewards of the land. You know, that's still a value of the Indigenous people, even though that we're willing to step into spaces of industry and build mega projects, because that's what we're talking about, is mega projects. We still have to balance the responsibility that our people carry. So it's just not me as a businessman making deals with you guys. It's all of us making sure we're hearing the voices of the Indigenous people too. So I guess that message also extends to all of you as interested, you know, partners, contributors, stakeholders, that, you know, follow the protocols. If you don't know what they are, contact someone like me, contact the WNNB, and we're always willing and, you know, like to come out and share what we know about things.
There have been a few different phases, I think, of the interaction between, for lack of a better word, the newcomer developers, those who settled and have had a growing influence on and a dominant influence over how things have happened in this area for the last 400 years. The different phases where, you know, in the beginning there was really some partnership. And then as the settler population started to outnumber the Indigenous population, there was a lot of just trampling of rights and ignoring of rights, a lot of abuses. And in that couple of 100 years, First Nations watched a lot of things pass them by or happen that impacted them negatively, and they didn't see a lot of the benefit. Truckloads of logs leaving their territory, and on and on. And then it started to come around to where there was a realization that, you know, wrongs have been done, this needs to be corrected, there's legal rights over all these resources, we're going to have to change how we're doing this, not just ignore it. And that shifted into the era of impact benefit agreements, or IBAs, where industry and government are still saying, we want to do something, now we recognize that's going to impact you, what do we have to pay you, what do we have to share of the profit of this project for you to be happy? And those took the form of IBAs. And so that's like a royalty payment from a project for its useful life. And that's better than nothing. But then the next phase is what we're calling true equity partnership. True equity partnership is where the impacted nations are invited to be equity owners in the projects, and they have not just a royalty payment but a piece of ownership and a voice and a vote at the board and the table. So that's a better evolution and definitely progress. What we're working on now is the next level up from that, and it's Indigenous leadership in sustainable development. And that's not a reactive posture where industry and government want to do something and then come ask for permission, which is necessary, and that's a table stakes. You have to do at least that for anything to get built. But what we'd like to see and what we're working on and offering into the market is Indigenous leadership, where the Indigenous communities do their own strategic planning. They look at the resource base, they assess global markets, they build technical capacity and business capacity within their organizations and their communities, and then they come to market and say, here's a project we'd like to see developed. Here's a resource we think, you know, there's an opportunity here to do this in a good way, but to meet a global market demand and to bring some economic wealth and independence to our community. Out there in the market, private developers, who wants to bid on this? And so it's flipping the order of who's taking the first step and who's responding. And that, I think, is one of the most important opportunities because it de-risks the project. You can ensure social acceptance to a much greater degree if it's the community that would be impacted that itself put the project forward. And it ensures that it's done sustainably. There's that hereditary knowledge of the watersheds, the species impacts, and that technical capabilities being built in the community. So that's what we're promoting and offering, and what we'd like to see a lot more of.
Can you speak on what successful examples of partnerships between Indigenous communities and maybe energy companies that could be replicated or that you could speak on?
It feels like we're going through an evolution of First Nations economic development when we start to, get ourselves involved into partnerships, joint ventures, which leads to joint ventures, dealing with utilities, having, large-scale government programs that are going to support these initiatives. We have to have a number of things in place before we can actually go out there and sit at a table with a partner to say that we're ready to go to work with you. So those things are happening, and like I say, it's not only an evolution for us, it's an evolution for Canada and for Canadians and New Brunswickers too. Because what it's doing is it's taken a relationship that was never really well kept over the past 300 years and saying, what do we have to do now to fix it? So I think it starts at the top levels first, that they need to realize, and like what Brad was saying, we realize that First Nations can get things done. And, from our side of it, when we talk about partnership development, we're going to come in there and we're going to look for the most powerful men in the room or the most powerful ladies in the room. And that's what I did with Brad a couple of years ago. I said, I need to talk to this guy. So I was able to, meet up, and I was saying, look, you know what, this is what we're getting involved in too. Do you have any advice for me? So, as I enter into those spaces to start forming those relationships, I've been received well in all of the places that I go into. Otherwise, if I was not received well, part of my job is to go in there and kind of sit down with people and say, are we really ready to work with each other? Because, there's a lot of mistrust that has been grown in Indigenous populations over the history of this country. So sometimes we're getting into, muddy waters, and we're just trying to, how do we make things more clear for all of us to work together? So those things are starting to happen. Before there's a relationship, we have to have understanding of each other. And one of those understandings, relates to where we're at in reconciliation. So reconciliation cannot happen without, addressing the issue of the land attached to that. When we're beyond that point, we start to see that, okay, now that we got the waters cleared up a little bit, let's start swimming together somewheres. So that's when we start to move together and make things happen. So getting closer to the question of, successful partnerships and how does that work, first it's establishing contact. Like I said, the REOIs, those RFPs get spread far and wide. Big industry companies get aware of, what's being offered, what's on the table. They read the criteria on what the expectations are of any proposals, and then they come out seeking us. So one of the things I notice now in 2023, 2024, 2025 is that there's a lot of people knocking on our doors wanting to do business with First Nations. And not everything works out. A lot of people come in with things that we're not ready yet, a lot of things that we do not have the capacity yet. So we have to turn some opportunities away. But when you do find, a proponent that knocks on your door and you get to the point where you got your chief and council sitting in front of them, they come in and they do a really great presentation for us. So they need to spark our interest, but more importantly than that is that they have to get us to trust them. We have to know that you're in it for the right reasons for us. We're not just going to say, yeah, we have this opportunity, you build it for us, but we'll only take a little piece of the pie. We're at the point now that, yeah, we're dreaming big. We're taking on very big steps when we get into, project development such as wind farms and SMRs and, You know, there's all kinds of talk, and I just referenced the Indigenous energy symposiums that have happened over the last couple of years too. So that's where, you know, we get to discuss a lot of those big project ideas, and it's like seeds are being planted. So networking happens, and then the relationship forms, and then you decide, okay, you know, we're 50-50 partners or 51-49 or whatever it may be. There has to be respect for that position. And, you know, fortunately, I'm in a relationship with an energy company that's working on a project, and we're 51% owners of that project. And what I like most about this is that they give the respect that a 51% majority shareholder deserves to have in that relationship. So everything that they do, and trust me, there's a lot more professional people out there than know a lot more about this industry than I do, but I'm learning from them all the time. And, you know, when I learn, my people learn. You know, when we do things together, our people benefit. And, you know, not only our people, but New Brunswickers benefit too from these developments.
So when we started out on some of these renewable procurements, we had a model in our mind, and just work with me, I don't have a drawing, I'll have to do it in the ear. There's a pinnacle of the triangle, we call that the First Nations community, all right? That's where all the social license, sort of what Tristan was talking about, sort of what Patrick was talking about. One apex or one corner of the triangle, that's the developer, that's where the skills and knowledge and actually how to get a project built. MB Power doesn't know how to do that today, nor does the community in large part. But we're learning, right? In the other corner of the triangle, that's the off-taker. That's MB Power's role, is how I see it. And you need to have a lot of trust between the developer and the community, and a lot of trust between the developer and the community with MB Power as well, or we don't get anywhere fast, right? So how these projects happen is that the community and the developer have to strike a strong partnership, right? No question on that, but there needs to be a lot of trust too with the off-taker. That's how the whole project gets financed, is on the balance sheet of MB Power to say, can we pay the bills on that power purchase agreement? And so we're spending a lot of time in saying, how do we make this triangle as strong as it can be? But at the same time, picking up on what Tristan's saying, how do we move that triangle for the developer's power back closer to the community, so it becomes more of the community with MB Power, and their role gets diminished through time. So if there's any developers in the room, I'm sorry, but we're trying to make it so that the First Nations has more control on the development of projects and not just being a token partner, more what Patrick said, a strong 51% or greater equity partner with a real voice at the table.
In developing partnerships, it's absolutely essential, if you want it to be optimal, go as well as it can go, that each party really understands the deeper interests of the other. A deal in which one side is really on the losing end is not going to produce the greatest good in the long term. It may work for the one who gets the larger slice of the pie on a single sort of one-off transactional basis, but then that partner is going to get excluded from future opportunities. So the best partnerships that I've seen develop are where people approach it as a permanent relationship, not as a one-off transactional opportunity. And the first focus is getting to know and understand and connect and build trust with the people. And then we talk about what's the thing that we could build together and how could that maybe be bigger than either of us understood or envisioned on our own. So in like the First Nations with the private developer piece, like Brad said, the First Nations are one corner of the triangle that has the rights and the right to reconciliation as well as the rights over the resources, but lacks the financial and the technical capital that are required to deliver full projects. That piece has to come from those who hold it now, and they, the private developers, bring money and project experience and technical ability to get things done. So the two working together are better off than either alone. With neither at the table, then a project can't happen.
Could you maybe speak on the importance of Indigenous participation plans in terms of like building that capacity for the workforce for these opportunities?
The one thing I'd like to say about that is that I feel that it often gets looked at as a box to check and a responsibility along the project development pathway. And there's this duty to consult, like it's an obligation and a task that we have to get out of the way before we can get on with doing business. I'd say that's a very limiting view. And if looked at as the opportunity to learn new things and to develop first a relationship that could be more beneficial than you yet understand, but to understand that much, that there's more there than you know, and come in, talking to developers now, come in with a humble attitude that you just want to get to understand each other. Aside from that, when we do projects, we always have an equity piece where there's some ownership. We also always have a skills and an expertise transfer piece where there's a commitment from the developer in the agreements we negotiate. We always require a commitment from the developer to bring in and train some Indigenous youth. There's also a supply chain piece where the developer commits to, if there are two otherwise roughly equivalent suppliers of anything, it could be gravel or concrete, or it could be a technical service like civil engineering. If there's two approximately comparable qualified suppliers and one is Indigenous and the other isn't, then have preferential procurement from Indigenous businesses. So those are pretty straightforward ways to help rebalance the economic disadvantage that Patrick mentioned, the level of poverty that has been across the communities for the last couple hundred years, is to recognize that and say we've got to do, when possible on these projects, we've got to give work to the people who most need the income. But first and foremost, don't look at that as an obligation. Look at it as an opportunity, because the First Nations also have the fastest growing and youngest population. The birth rate and the population growth is significantly higher than average. They have very motivated, talented people who know the areas, know the communities, bring understanding of the lay of the land and just the environment, and can really benefit a project more than I think the private sector has yet appreciated.
If you're interested as stakeholders, organizations, potential business partners to learn more about IPPs, you can check out Canada Council for Indigenous Business, I believe it is, the CCIB.
I think so.
Yeah, and what they offer, advice on Indigenous participation plans, but they also offer what they call the PAIR program. And I believe the acronym stands for Professional Accreditation of Indigenous Relationships.
Paraphrasing, but it's close.
Yeah, so they put you through a series of, understandings of what it takes to develop and understand Indigenous communities and Indigenous people, so that it helps you to understand how to better approach those. So there's different levels of certification. It starts with a bronze and then a silver and then a gold. For those companies that have achieved those types of accreditation, it proves to the Indigenous organizations that they've done their homework before they've gone into the community. So what that does is it increases the probability of succeeding in developing those relationships, because even in my own position and in my own work, things can go wrong very fast. And for somebody coming in to say, we've got this and this and that, that's great, but sometimes your approach may not be the right way to come into our chief and council, because sometimes it could get rough in there, because we're gonna test your what you have, what you're saying, how we can trust you, and we're gonna weed some things out. But that pair process is really something that you should check out. So one last thing I want to say in regards to that is that you have to be prepared to hear our side of the story. And if you're talking to me and we're talking about doing something great together, I expect you to know. Well, I expect myself that I'm going to tell you about the history of my family. I'm going to tell you about the history of my community. I'm going to tell you about the history of my nation. And I'm going to tell you about our dreams for the future. So those are the things that you are going to hear from Indigenous developers. You're going to hear from the chiefs and councils. You're going to hear from our youth. Our youth are very powerful nowadays. I got to commend them a lot, because even though they're learning in a modern space, they come back to our communities and there's still something inside of them reminds them of who they are and where they come from, and they take that with them wherever they go. And, you know, that's not going to go away. You know, they tried to take that away from us, but we were resilient, we survived, and we're still surviving. So when we speak out, we speak about who we are, and if you want to be our partners, if you want to be our friends, you have to be able to listen to us too. So that means having an open heart and an open mind to ideas and situations that have been unresolved for quite some time. So part of moving forward is reconciliation, is, you know, not just fixing a relationship, but it's like, you know, repairing, but creating something new that's going to work for everybody and that everybody's going to be satisfied with. Particularly the First Nations. I mean, some situations we may be hard to satisfy and hard to sit down, but, you know, we have wants too.
You know, on our side, it's employment, right? So Michael Porter, I don't know if anybody knows Michael, but we are having a hard time running energy efficiency programs in First Nations communities. So what do? We employ a First Nations community member to help us with those barriers, and now we're starting to finally see success. Again, First Nations can get it done. It's not for me, European settler descendant, to say this is how we're going to fix it with First Nations. Ask the First Nations, what do they want? And employ them and give them opportunities, and then we'll learn from them and say, wow, you're knocking it out of the park, Michael, way to go, and just keep snowballing. That's just one example. There's lots more.
Maybe talk a little bit about lessons learned or best practices on a lot of the collaborations that you're talking about, or future collaborations between the Indigenous communities and energy companies in New Brunswick.
You mentioned it earlier, patience, right? Like we're trying to be as creative, thoughtful, and deliberate and patient as possible to see these things move along. And sometimes, like federal elections, we lose opportunities because we just couldn't get there. But you're not going to see me or my team kind of putting pressure on folks to say, hey, we need that answer next week or we're going to be out of time. That was our biggest lesson learned, and that's where we see a lot of the success, is that when something comes along, generally speaking, if it's in MB Power's control, it shouldn't be a surprise to the First Nations communities by the time it becomes real. When we flip to the capital C consultation requirements under the Environmental Act and duty to consult by the Crown. So that's where my team and Chantel and Jesse and Ed and others spend a lot of time, is just making sure that, hey, Brad, the minute you have an inkling of an idea, can you share it with us so we can share it with everybody else, so there's no surprises.
Any of you want to add to what Brad mentioned? Best practices, challenges that advice, I guess.
So I think, as a wrap up, is best practices, best challenges, learning successes. I think one of the things that I've discovered is that it's okay to dream big as a First Nation. So, when I say dream big, we're talking, projects that are in the hundreds of millions of dollars now. We're talking, never mind coming to us and giving us used equipment and, stuff that's going to break down and continually cost us money. We want top of the line stuff. And I know that sounds a little bit, high up there, but we have our experience with those things. For instance, our grocery store that we had to close there, when we built that 27 years ago, we've got an old equipment that was taken out of a farm field, and we survived with that, and we built other companies who fixed that stuff for us that don't even belong to us. So the message is to dream big, but also I think having the courage. So if you're a developer, a First Nations person, have the courage to go out there and step up and sit down in as many spaces as you can. For instance, sitting up here with these gentlemen today, they obviously have a lot more experience than me in the energy industry, but I got a lot of experience too from the places where I've come from. So having courage to carry that with me into these places is very important, and I feel honored to sit up here with all of you again. It's my third time presenting to the FCC and the JEDI Business Forum, so thanks for inviting me again, folks. It was a pleasure.
Like Patrick has done here, where I started, any how problem is really a who problem, and the first who is you, so show up and be active and take the stage and come and speak from your experience. and ask for others to do the same. Be a catalyst and a convener as well as a member of the community that's working together on this stuff. Lessons learned, a couple, one of the best terms and the concept that goes with it that I've learned out around the sacred fire at the powwow is Imsitnogama, which means all my relations. But it's not all my relations like my aunt and uncle and cousin and brother and sister. It's all my relations to all of you and to the government and to business and to the plants and the animals. It's all my relations. And it's a greeting and a blessing, and that term it just has the right sound and feel to it, Imsitnogama. So I love that one. And it's something to carry with you as you walk on. That's really what's important. In this change we're talking about in Indigenous leadership and sustainable development and the opportunity, the infinite opportunity, like Brad said, it's first about that relationship, all my relationships. So that's one lesson learned. And the other kind of goes with that. We often say in negotiation and entrepreneurship, go hard on the problem, easy on the person. And that I either gain or profit or I learn, and either way is a gain. So there are times when things go sideways. This is why Brad said to go easy on, not to reveal the guilty. No, we all have, when something goes sideways, we're all equally implicated and involved. And that's the thing, is to be hard on the problem and easy on the person. Don't make it personal. Don't carry, a bad feeling about something that didn't go the way you wanted into harming the relationship. The relationship's more important, and you're going to come back and you're going to work with that person again, and you're both going to have learned something about where your common interests are and how you work. So don't let a bad experience stop you from being a friend and a partner and wanting that ongoing relationship. Best lesson to, many of the best lessons come from when things don't go well. And then you learn upon reflection, how did I show up in this situation that wasn't helpful? What could I do better next time? And I understand more about where that person's coming from and what didn't work there for them. So don't ever let it slow you down. And back to the first point, be active, be involved, think about all my relationships and get out there, be part of it. Expect that sometimes things will get a little rough. Things might get uncomfortable. Someone might raise a point that might set you back. People have a lot of, feelings built up over many years of things not having been done the right way. But that challenge is where the opportunity is, because we can use the energy in that to do things the right way. And that's something that I think the world is so hungry for. It's our communities and all our businesses. There's so much opportunity that is a bit pent up because relationships haven't been handled well. And if we focus on Nsitnogama and working together, we won't just have a vibrant economy and a clean energy and technology leadership here in Atlantic Canada. We'll be really a lighthouse to the world of what's possible.
Amazing. I can't really clap right now, but I do want to open it up for audience questions. We do have 2 mics that are standing. If we have any specific questions for our panelists, we do have a little bit of time before we go into our last impact interview.
Final point I make while we wait for someone to take the mic, which someone's going to do, I'm sure. Now, it's this, that a lot of conferences, and I've gone to more than I can count, it gets to feel like one way, handing of information from the stage to the audience. And we all had enough of that if any of us made it through public education. So that gets a little bit boring. I don't want everyone out there to be bored. And what I want to increasingly figure out how to do when in settings like this is to make it more interactive and more about what happens here carries on. It's not just information that you forget, but that something shifts, a relationship is built, we make plans to work together. And so from the stage, I'm always thinking about not just information to pass one way out to the room, but what's the change, behavioral change? What's the call to action that if people took it to heart could be different and could change the way that we're working together? So we've said some things about it, but really it's participation. Don't be afraid to like Patrick has done, step up on the stage. Is that Christian there?
Oh, Christian, look at
Christian's got the
you.
mic.
I'm looking around the room and I'm listening to you guys talk, and I'm realizing that a lot of people in the room might have a different type of business that has nothing to do with the clean energy, and they're listening to it, and I see a lot of people thinking like, you know, I have this type of business or I represent this type of organization. How can I ever be a part of that world, or how can that kind of benefit me or have that mutual partnership? And I think maybe that's a question for you guys to kind of, is there any suggestions about, you know, in terms of like the people that have different types of businesses here, how they can be, you know, part of that world or part of that business, or, you know, find a way to make that connection so that they can include their business in opportunities?
I think my answer to that, and I was thinking about it, and I mentioned it briefly, was pay attention to the Indigenous youth. You know, they're focused on the environment, they're focused on reconciliation, they're focused on IT, they're focused on AI. No matter what the modern trends are, those are the young Indigenous people that are getting the most amount of exposure on what's current. You know, and I've seen some of them on various stages. We had a forum with the Wolastoqey Nation of New Brunswick a few months ago, and they put these recent university grads up on the stage, and they were talking about the environment and the different ideas that can be developed from the environment perspective, and it just blew my mind how smart and I think they were mostly women at that time at that event, but it blew my mind how well versed they are in the stuff that they're learning in university, how much passion they bring to their discussions and what they're trying to deliver to the crowds.
And I would say there's very little in the economy that isn't somehow part of what we're doing. So don't assume that just because you don't build $100 million energy assets, you're not part of the whole community that's working together on this stuff. And just, you know, coming up with a few off-the-cuff examples, we look to Indigenous artists to develop our logos. And we have a number of different logos that we worked with Indigenous artists, and there's a piece of business in that for them. We host conferences. The Indigenous-led Energy Symposium is one that Brad mentioned. We need caterers and organizers for that. We're starting another conference the first one will be in May of next year on Indigenous leadership in the nuclear sector. And again, we'll need venues and caterers and organizers, and musicians play, thinking about the Muskrat Singers and how they open events. There are so many different things that work I was talking to one of the entrepreneurs who was on the stage here earlier in cybersecurity, and he told me things I didn't know. But there's so many things that, you know, we need help with in the kind of projects that we're doing, the work we're doing. And as a fund, we have a core and satellite strategy, you might say. The core being clean energy, but the satellites being the companies that build it, the companies that make technologies for it, and all the way out to media companies that help promote it. So we invest in all those different aspects that in one system, they create the growth opportunity that we're looking for. But you can't do all that we're trying to do with just one sector. Like, it's not narrowly just energy. So don't assume for a minute that because you don't have energy sector experience, you can't be part of the work we're doing.
So you were a JEDI graduate, celebrated at the first Indigenous Business Forum in 2023. What learnings or opportunities or doors opened has your Indigenous Business Forum and JEDI experience given you?
It provided a safe environment for me to kind of experiment, to try different things. You know, I'd have different ideas. I bring them to Frank or Diane or different people in the team, in the cohort, and get feedback. You know, I'm in IT, so there's lots of opportunities. Kind of right now, what I'm focusing on primarily is contract staffing. I do a lot of contract staffing. I hire people to work for the government of New Brunswick. I'm also working in Alberta and BC. I'm also doing a lot of IT consulting, and in my spare time, I do e-learning content creation for Skillsoft because, you know, once again, I have nothing else to do, right?
What has helped you succeed the most in starting and running your business?
I find just coming to events like this, just being able to network and meet new people, being part of the JEDI program, I've been exposed to a lot of new ideas, and I was able to build a lot of confidence. As part of that program, one of the I think one of the key components was you and Diane being there for us and helping us out a lot, and always being available. There was times we'd be talking on the phone at 10 o'clock at night or something like that, or exchanging emails at odd hours. 2 in the morning, he'd be writing us back. As well, we also had Elder Donna Augustine, who was very crucial in helping support us spiritually and having a different worldview.
Is there anything you would have done differently?
As I think about that, probably not, because everything I've done has been a stepping stone, as I move forward. There's sometimes I've had a lot of success or a lot of failures, but as I move forward, everything that I've done has taught me something. So, you try to turn that into a positive experience. You can't just focus on negative and say, "Oh man, I didn't get a contract, I failed." But you have to, when there is failure, you got to kind of analyze it and figure out what happened and move forward from there.
I want to thank you very much.
So JEDI is actually having our 30th anniversary on June 25th and 26th, and we're actually having it at the Convention Center here in Fredericton, so please, please come join us. It's going to be 2 days of awesomeness. We're also going to have some awards ceremony and gala to kind of chat about our EDO of the year, ETO of the year, Aspiring Entrepreneur Award, as well as an impact, community impact business award as well. To close off, I would like to invite again, one of my favorite people, Miss Elder Donna, back to the stage for the closing prayer.
So I'm going to offer this prayer of gratitude. First of all, why don't we give a big round of applause to the JEDI incubator graduates. I think they did a marvelous job. Yeah. So my prayer will be to kind of ask the Creator to watch over you as you go home to your home fires, back to your families and your loved ones. Ask the Creator and the spirits of our ancestors to watch over you and to give thanks for today. Walale kisuk, uchi kiskuk tandel mawaliek, mi wad me go chikelo go so ambegis ruego. Walale nego tandel yankwe gatani bo omuyek. It wacht me nigel mi machu gabishi dano nige tan we go dijik ankwe wad skisuk abo on modesk. How Chibanuk Chamishan Doto Nadil, Chamiskipu and Lame Nadil, Walali Guchi Kiskuk and Del Mawaliak, Walali Gapuchin and Chana, Nujina, Mishuajisk. Harp Kades Nuk Chamishan Doto Nadil, Walali Kiskuk and Del Duguivig, Dandil Depi Igam Sut Boy, Walali Uchidum Sut Evijig. Aho. Hartkas Nuk Sawa Kamiskishna in Atmos it Amo, Walali Tawadabek Sultiak, Walali Nego Dandil Yanko Clemonemonwek. Walali tani the quail kisco and they'll dip the eye sut koi. Aho. Ha, o adnuk chamisha loto nadil, wabe muin and levy nadil. Walali guchin pison, Walali guchinum sut chinmuk. Walali and they'll do give a kisco and they'll do galoko gulswan. Hagish namamigo, Walali kishnamamigo, Danelium, Ignumia kamiad and a palanek. Dandel Ignumia to go and roll de go chimmy majuan. Walali kiskuk dandelibo anumuya. Said Nogama, all my relations, for we are all related. So have a great trip home, everybody, and I'll see you all soon. Motes.